All right, let's kick off another deep dive. Today we're headed to Antigua and Barbuda. Sun, sand, and West. Well, this travel guide promises to show us more than just the typical postcard views.
And what's really cool is it's not just one island.
Oh.
It's a twin island nation, Antigua and Barbuda, each with its own distinct personality.
So it's like two vacations in one.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm sold. So tell me, what's the difference between these two islands?
Well, Antigua, you've got your rolling hills, lush greenery.
Ah, the classic island vibe.
Right, and of course those famous beaches.
Can't forget those.
But then you go to Barbuda and it's totally different, flat landscape.
Really?
Yeah, and it's home to the frigate bird sanctuary.
Okay, now that sounds intriguing. I'm picturing thousands of birds, but is there more to it?
Oh, you'll have to wait and see. The guide builds up the suspense.
All right, keeping me in suspense. Now, before we get too far ahead, the guide takes us back to the beginning. It mentions the Arawak Indians, the first people to call these islands home. Master navigators, apparently, sailed between South America and the Caribbean.
It's more than just sailing. They were navigating by the stars, the currents, even like subtle changes in the water's color.
Wow, that's incredible. I can't even imagine navigating like that.
Right. The skill and knowledge is mind-blowing. And what's amazing is some of that traditional knowledge still exists today. You can see it in the island's seafaring culture.
That's so cool. It's like a direct link to the past. But we have to talk about the more, well, difficult parts of the island's history, right? Like Columbus arriving and then the British taking over.
Absolutely. The guide doesn't sugarcoat it. It talks about British colonization, the sugar plantation era, the slave trade.
A dark period.
Definitely. And it really emphasizes how much those events still shape the island's culture today.
You can't understand the present without knowing the past.
Exactly. And speaking of things you can't miss, Antigua is known for its beaches, right?
Right.
365 of them, one for every day of the year.
But let's be real. Are they all amazing? Or is that just marketing hype?
Well, some are definitely as good as the pictures. Dickinson Bay, Jolly Beach.
Yeah.
Those are popular for a reason.
Yeah, they always pop up in those travel brochures.
Right. But the guide mentions these hidden gems, less crowded spots.
Oh, like where?
Well, Rendezvous Bay, for one. They say it has breathtaking views.
Breathtaking views, you say? Okay, I'm intrigued. What about Barbuda? Does it have those idyllic beaches too?
Barbuda has something even more unique. Pink sand beach.
Wait, pink sand?
Pink. It's because of tiny shells and coral fragments, the guide says.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm adding that to my bucket list right now.
Yeah.
But after a few days on the beach, I get a little restless. I need some adventure.
Well, good news. The guide says Antigua and Barbuda have plenty to offer beyond the beach. Like, have you ever thought about exploring underwater?
Well, I've snorkeled before, but...
The guide raves about Antigua's coral reefs. Imagine swimming through this vibrant world. Colorful fish everywhere, amazing coral formations.
Okay, that does sound pretty amazing. But what about that frigate bird sanctuary you mentioned earlier? Is there a way to experience that beyond just watching the birds?
That's the coolest part. You can actually snorkel or dive beneath them while they're flying above you.
Whoa, seriously. Swimming with frigate birds.
Yeah, it's supposed to be incredible. But hey, if you're more into exploring on land, that's cool too. The guide suggests hiking up Monkey Hill in Antigua, panoramic views of the rainforest, chance to see some wildlife.
Okay, now that sounds like my kind of adventure.
And if you want something totally different, Barbuda National Park has these trails that go through mangroves and marshes.
It's like you're stepping into another world. Now, all this exploring is making me hungry. What does the guide say about the food in Antigua and Barbuda?
Get ready for a flavor explosion. They've got this incredible blend of African, European, and indigenous influences. And you can't talk about the food without mentioning the Trinity.
The Trinity.
Saltfish, fungi, and pepper pot.
Okay, saltfish I get, but fungi and pepper pot.
Fungi is like a cornmeal porridge, usually served with the saltfish.
Yeah.
And pepper pot is a hearty stew with meat, spices, so flavorful.
Sounds delicious. But being islands, they must have amazing seafood too, right?
Oh, yeah. Tons of fresh seafood. Like, imagine having grilled lobster right on the beach.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
And the guide says the street food scene is amazing too. Fish cakes, fish roti.
Lots of fish. I'm sensing a theme here. But besides the food, what I love about island life is the festivals.
Well, Antigua and Barbuda know how to celebrate. Antigua's carnival is legendary.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
The guide talks about Jouvert, this pre-dawn party with paint and music,
Hmm.
and then the grand parade with the costumes and energy.
It sounds like pure joy.
It is. And then in Barbuda, you've got Caravana, a bit more laid back, but just as fun.
Oh, what's that like?
Lots of kite flying competitions, traditional Barbudan music.
Okay, that does sound pretty relaxing. But it sounds like there's more than just those two big festivals.
Yeah, there's Regatta Week, which celebrates their sailing traditions,
Mhm.
and even a rum festival.
Rum festival, you say?
Need I say more?
Nope, I think that speaks for itself. Now, we can't forget about the capital city, St. John's.
Now, St. John's is like a mix of old and new. The guide points out this cool contrast with colorful buildings next to historical landmarks.
So where should we start exploring? What are the must-sees?
Well, so shows St. John's Cathedral is stunning. Then there's the Museum of Antigua and Barbuda, which tells you all about the island's history.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I always love learning about local history.
Right. And then, of course, you have to visit Nelson's Dockyard. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Nelson's Dockyard, that's the old naval base, right?
Yeah. Cobblestone streets, restored buildings from the 1700s, a harbor full of yachts.
Wow, it's like stepping back in time. But is there more to St. John's than just those big attractions? What about the local vibe?
The guide suggests checking out the markets, exploring the harbor, trying all the different foods.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. But our history exploration doesn't end there, right? The guide mentions other historical spots outside of St. John's.
Yeah, it takes us back to Nelson's Dockyard, but this time it focuses on specific details that make it come alive.
Ooh, like what?
Well, there's the copper and tin works. You can see these restored tools. Imagine how things were made back then.
That's cool.
And then there's Admiralty House, where a British naval commander used to live.
So you can walk in the same rooms. Imagine what life was like back then.
Exactly. But the guide also talks about the darker side of history. It brings us to Betty's Hope, the first sugar plantation on the island.
That's a place where history really comes to life, doesn't it?
It does. The guide recommends visiting the restored Great House and Boiling House to understand how the plantation worked. But it also talks about the slave quarters, a reminder of the difficult past.
It's important to acknowledge both sides of history, right? The good and the bad.
Definitely. And to keep exploring. The guide mentions other forts like Fort James and Fort Barrington, and even ruins like Fort Shirley and Spanish Point.
It's like a history buff's dream. So much to explore. But with all that exploring, we'll need a place to stay.
Don't worry, the guide has that covered too. And the best part is, there's something for everyone. Luxurious resorts, charming boutique hotels, even budget-friendly guest houses.
So many options. What caught your eye?
Honestly, those beachfront villas, waking up to the sound of the ocean, amazing views.
Yeah, that does sound pretty amazing. But what about those of us who are a little more eco-conscious?
They've got eco-lodges too, designed to be sustainable using local materials, renewable energy.
It's great that they're focused on protecting the environment.
Definitely. And if you just want a completely stress-free vacation, they're all-inclusive resorts.
Ah, yes, the classic all-inclusive. So from luxury to budget-friendly, they have got it all. But before we get carried away with all these options, let's talk about the practical stuff.
All right, let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
First up, visas.
The guide says most people don't need a visa for short stays.
Oh, good. One less thing to worry about. But what about getting around? We're talking about 2 islands, so I'm guessing ferries are involved.
Ferries are definitely the way to go between the islands. The guide describes it as a really scenic journey.
I can already picture it. Sun shining, blue water.
Yeah, exactly. But for exploring each island, the guide recommends renting a car. Gives you the most flexibility.
I can see that, being able to go wherever you want, whenever you want.
Right. But if you're not into driving, the guide also mentions local buses.
Oh, is that a good way to get around?
Apparently so. And it's supposed to be a great way to experience local life.
That's cool. Okay, transportation sorted. What about money? What currency do they use?
The official currency is the East Caribbean dollar, but they also accept U.S. dollars pretty much everywhere.
That's convenient. Does the guide have any other tips for handling money?
Yeah, it suggests having some local currency for small purchases and when dealing with local vendors.
Makes sense. Supports the local economy, too. Now, I have to ask about safety. Is it safe to travel in Antigua and Barbuda?
The guide says both islands are generally safe for tourists, but they recommend taking basic precautions.
You know, like being aware of your surroundings, not flashing valuables.
Exactly. Common sense stuff. And being respectful of local customs and traditions, of course.
Absolutely. But beyond those basic tips, are there any unique things we should be aware of? Anything unexpected?
Well, the guide really emphasizes learning to swim.
That's interesting.
It's not just for fun, but for safety too, and to really experience everything the islands have to offer.
Like those coral reefs you mentioned. Any other unexpected tips?
The guide also encourages trying the local food beyond just the resort restaurants, like find those hole-in-the-wall places, the street food vendors.
Now, that's a tip I can get behind. Authentic local flavors are the best.
Right. And last but not least, the guide reminds us to embrace the island's relaxed pace.
Ah, island time.
Island time. Slow down, unplug, and just enjoy the moment.
That's the best way to travel, isn't it? Soaking it all in.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like we've covered a lot about Antigua and Barbuda already.
We have, and I'm already feeling inspired to book a trip. But this is just the beginning of our deep dive, right?
Oh, yeah, there's so much more to explore. Like, we haven't even touched on the culture yet.
Culture.
Culture, music, art, festivals.
Okay, now you've got my attention. I can't wait to hear more about that.
You know, while we were talking about those historical sites, it made me think about how the guide presents history. Like, it's not just dates and facts.
Yeah, it's more like history is still alive there, shaping the islands.
Right. Like with Betty's Hope. It doesn't shy away from the difficult part of the plantation's past. It talks about the people who were enslaved there,
Yeah.
their stories, their strength.
It's powerful stuff.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes even further. It mentions all these projects and memorials today that are like honoring their memory, celebrating their descendants, showing how they shaped the island's culture.
It's about recognizing that those layers of history are still there, making Antigua and Barbuda what they are today. But, after all that, I'm kind of ready for something a bit lighter. What about all those practical things? Packing, transportation, the stuff that can be a little stressful when you're planning a trip.
Oh, don't worry. The guide has all that covered too. It even breaks down all the different types of places to stay. Because, let's be honest, choosing a hotel online can be a bit overwhelming.
Overwhelming is putting it mildly. So many options. So how does the guide help with that? Does it recommend specific places?
It's good because it sorts the options by what kind of trip you want, like luxury, budget-friendly, and stuff like that, which makes it way easier to decide. Like if you're looking for a super luxurious private experience.
Oh, tell me more.
It mentions these private island resorts like Jumbie Bay Island. It sounds incredible.
A private island. Sign me up. But what about those of us who prefer something smaller, maybe a little more local?
The guide mentions this place called Galley Bay. Describes it as having a relaxed vibe, almost like bohemian. Perfect for that authentic Caribbean feel.
I love that. And what about budget-friendly options? Because not everyone can afford a private island, right?
Right. The guide doesn't leave out those of us who are on a budget. It talks about guest houses, self-catering apartments, and it gives good descriptions, points out what makes them special. It shows you don't have to spend a ton of money to have a great time.
It's about finding what works for you, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a fancy resort or a cozy guest house. Okay, so accommodations sorted. Now, what about getting around, especially between the two islands?
Yeah, the guide talks about transportation too. It seems like ferries are the way to go for island hopping.
I can imagine that being pretty scenic.
It is. They say it's a beautiful way to see both islands with great views. Plus, you get to enjoy that fresh ocean air. But for exploring each island, renting a car seems to be the best bet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gives you more freedom, right?
Right. But if you're not up for driving, you can also take local buses.
Oh, are those easy to use?
The guide says they are. And it actually suggests taking the bus as a fun way to, experience the islands from a local's point of view.
Okay, I like that. Turning transportation into a cultural experience. But let's talk about money. We know they use the East Caribbean dollar, but U.S. dollars are accepted too. Any other tips for handling money there?
The guide says to carry some local currency, especially for small purchases, and if you're buying from local vendors. It's a good way to avoid, those tourist prices you sometimes get.
That's smart. And it supports the local economy too. Okay, money sorted. Now, I have to ask about safety. The guide says it's generally safe, but recommends being careful, which is always good advice. Any other safety tips we should know? Anything specific to Antigua and Barbuda?
Well, the guide really stresses learning how to swim.
That's an interesting one.
It's not just about having fun in the water, but being safe too. And, to really experience everything the islands offer.
Like those coral reefs you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Another tip, don't be afraid to eat outside the resorts.
Oh, yeah. The local food is always the